to everybody. We will commence in less than 2 minutes. Please stay with us. A very warm welcome to everybody for joining us today at ICC UAE webinar on Incoterms 2020. The webinar is organized by ICC UAE in partnership with National Association of Freight and Logistics. The webinar will be for 1 hour, and before starting the webinar, we have welcome remarks by Nadia Abdulaziz, who is the chair of ICC UAE Commission on Custom and Trade Facilitation. She is the board member of ICC UAE, and she is also the president of National Association of Freight and Logistics. So over to you, Nadia, for opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes.
Welcome everybody to the ICC Incoterms 2020. And this seminar is organized, as we mentioned, in cooperation with ICC UAE and NAFL. And it's a day where you're going to learn all of the things about the latest drafted Incoterms for 2020. As you know, every 10 years they change. I'd like to thank you for attending and being here with us. I'd like to thank Vincent O'Brien, who is our ICC director and is extremely experienced in this field, and this is why we've selected him to be here with us. Thank you for sponsoring this for us. Thank you, Habib Rizwan from ICC Management UAE and Jovel for putting this together. And before we start, I just wanted to update our members based on our last webinar on open discussions day that we had with you. We are continuing the dialogue with the government offices. As promised, we had sent letters to various entities, again, Al-Wasl Properties and others, and JAFSA, and we are getting some response. Mr. Shankar will be updating you on the feedback that we got. And I think if there's any other questions or anything that you'd like to share or ask regarding the seminar, you can post your questions on the Q&A or on the chat also. And Mr. Habib will be having a poll regarding the training and Incoterms. So I don't want to take long. I just thank everybody. I think I'll let you take over, Mr. Vincent and Habib, and thank you so much. And in case you are interested to have this training as a full day certified training by International Chamber of Commerce, and also as NAFL, we will give you also an additional certificate. You can contact us. We can do it privately for your staff or individually or as a group for NAFL mixed participants. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy this day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadia, for the opening remarks. Now we have our expert for today, Vincent O'Brien, who is the director of ICC UAE. He is also a member of the executive committee of the Global ICC Banking Commission. He is the director of the Institute of International Banking Law and Practice, and he has delivered training in more than 100 countries on trade finance. So over to you, Vincent O'Brien, for today.
Thank you very much, Habib. And Nadia, it's really my great pleasure and my great honor to be working with you on this program today. As you know, Nadia is chair of our commission on trade facilitation, and she's doing a wonderful job, and she is just so practical. She told me before I start this seminar, she doesn't want the long history of Incoterms, how it developed, how it evolved. She wants me really to very quickly get into the nuts and bolts and what's important for the members of NAFL. And Nadia, I will do my best. I will do my very best.
Thank you so much.
To members of you're welcome. And to all of you participants, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or Q&A a little bit later. And then I'm not going to say much about ICC, but the power of ICC is due to really one thing. And again, like NAFL, it's our members. It's our members who help us craft all of these rules. It's not that there are lawyers or experts in ivory towers. We have commissions all around the world in countries, and we get the feedback, we get your input, a lot of input from the UAE. So please feel free to join us and become part of the global community of the ICC. Now, to start on Incoterms, when we're talking about Incoterms, it's international commercial terms. So these are rules. And the unique thing about these rules is that these rules are actually used in every country in the world through a practical presentation on the key aspects of Incoterms that you need to know. In less than an hour, I'm sure I won't cover absolutely everything you need to know, but I guarantee you that you will be very much aware of the rules, how they operate, and how they are applied in your day-to-day international freight forwarding and transport. And that this is the old rule book that you will be familiar with. And like my one, it's well used. It's something you use as a handbook every day. And this is what the new book actually looks like. Now, when we look at the Incoterms, it says ICC rules for the use of domestic and international trade terms. So the first thing to highlight is that in practice, these rules are used extensively for global trade in every corner of the world, but actually they're not used significantly in domestic trade, but they can also be applied in domestic trade. And I will give you examples of that a little bit later. But now, for now, think of an exporter and an importer operating in different countries, different regulations, different jurisdictions, etc., different local laws and regulations. So what do the Incoterms rules actually do for you? Well, when we look at the Incoterms book of rules, it's a book of 11 rules, okay? 11 rules, and what the rules really do is they set out the obligations of the seller and the buyer under a contract of sale. So predominantly today, because you're in freight forwarding international business, I'll be talking about the international contract of sale. Okay, so looking at the book, and now we look in a little bit more detail. So the background, Incoterms came around and were first published in 1936 by the International Chamber of Commerce. And that was because at that time there was a lot of inconsistencies and misunderstandings on the obligations of the parties under the international contract of sale. As Nadia mentioned, the rules are revised nearly every 10 years and revised 7 times. And the latest version of the rules, is Incoterms 2010, and these became effective globally on the 1st of January 2020. So now we're kind of 1.5 years through the application of Incoterms. So later on, I'll be able to share with you some of the issues that have arisen, but now I'm keeping it simple for now as we proceed. When you actually open this book, the Incoterms rule book, because it is a rule book, it contains, as I said, 11 rules. So for each of the rules, and you're familiar already with many of them, EXW, FOB, CIF, etc. For each of the 11 rules, behind each rule, there is an explanation of the obligations of the parties, the seller and the buyer, under the international contract of sale. So on your screen, on the right-hand side, as you look at it, you should be able to see Incoterms 2020 rules, a red box around it. So for each of the 11 Incoterms, we have something like this. On one hand, the obligations of the seller under that particular Incoterm, and on the other hand, then with the obligations of the buyer under each of the 11 Incoterms. And I'll go into this in more detail a little bit later. But you can see on your screen obligations of seller, A1 to A10, obligations of buyer, B1 to B10. So under which Incoterm, A2 tells us when the seller has delivered the goods under the contract of sale. Now remember, for example, I am at the moment sitting in Ireland. If I was an Irish exporter in the UAE, well, the goods can be contractually delivered to you in Dublin at my premises, at the port of loading, at the airport of departure, at the airport or port of transshipment, or at the port or airport or place of final destination, or even the delivery can happen at the importer's warehouse in his country. So depending on the chosen Incoterm. So this is what we're going to do today, work through the rules and highlight the key issues that you need to know. So just to highlight, because it's really important, A2 would tell you when the seller has delivered the goods. B2 would tell you when, under that Incoterm, that contract, the buyer has taken delivery of the goods. And of course, risk is really important. And of course, right now in this COVID-19 environment, and I'm not going to diverge right now, we have an increase in risk. We have an increase in risk of goods getting delayed. We've increased a risk of goods not getting transshipped, goods not getting unloaded. We even have the increase in risk of documents in respect of the goods getting stuck in the logistics chain. But that's a story later. But highlighting right now that A3, under obligations of the seller, tells you when the risk has transferred in the goods from the seller to the buyer. And of course, because as freight forwarders, you are facilitating so much of these movements, it's absolutely mission critical. You are also familiar. Moving forward just a little bit further for now. Again, background to Incoterms. If we go back to Incoterms, for example, Incoterms 2000, okay, and this is very, very brief. At that time, there were 13 Incoterms in the Incoterms rules, okay? But now in the revision to 2010, sorry, the number of rules was made shorter, clearer, more precise. So the number was reduced from 13 to 11. And what this meant, even though you don't need to remember this, but it just may be interesting to know, in 2000 we had Incoterm DAFDESDEQDDU, which is delivered at frontier, delivered ex ship, delivered ex key, and DDU gone. And then in the Incoterms 2010, these were replaced by two new Incoterms, which were DAT, DAP. So DAP, delivered at place, and DAT, delivered at terminal. So now you can see in the last rule book, we had 11 rules, including DAT and DAP, and the other ones you are a long time familiar with. But now let's get right up to date. Right up to date, and now we're looking at Incoterms 2020. So now it gets a little bit more important for you. The rest was kind of history, nice to know, but now it's need to know. Okay. In the revision to Incoterms 2020, we had something very interesting happen, and that was that the Incoterm DAT from the earlier version 2010, DAT, delivered at terminal, has been removed. Or dare I say more correctly, DAT has now evolved into the Incoterm DPU, delivered, place, unloaded. Okay, unloaded. I'm actually getting one or two questions already, but if you don't mind, I'll hold on to them a little bit later because I'm coming to them. So DAT has evolved into DPU, and just a short but concise explanation. DAT was when the seller would have to deliver the goods at a designated named terminal, usually in the country of import, in 99% of the time, country of import, delivered at a terminal. But the members and the feedback from the countries was, this Incoterm was very good, very clear. It placed the delivery and transport risk on the side of the seller under the contract, but that T, terminal, was too narrow a designation. So it was recommended that we expand this to a place. So now it is the responsibility of the parties to agree precisely the named place. So delivered, place, unloaded. And under DPU, the seller is always responsible for the unloading of the cargo. So DPU for an air shipment, as you know well, is not so important because the cargo is going to be unloaded off the aircraft anyway, okay? But for example, if it was a vessel, it was a marine shipment, and it was a chartered vessel for a commodity, well, unloading charges and responsibility, discharging the vessel can be very, very significant. So then it will be really, really important. Next change you can see on your screen is kind of CIP, Incoterms 2010, and again, CIP, Incoterms 2020. Now, this may seem like a small change, but in your line of business, it's a really important change. Under Incoterms 2010, under the rules, for CIF, cost, insurance and freight, and CIP for both of these Incoterms. In Incoterms 2010, the older version, the seller had an obligation to insure the goods on minimum terms. But now the change in Incoterms 2020 is that under CIP, okay, carriage insurance paid, CIP, which of course you would use for an air shipment for sure, under CIP, the requirement in the rule is that the risk coverage must be of a higher level, and it is recommended that this would be all risk or equivalent, commonly known as Institute Cargo Clause A. But that's CIP, but under CIF, the insurance requirement under the rule is still minimum terms. So CIP is the one where there is a significant change in the insurance requirement. The insurance requirement for the seller has actually gone up. And they are some of the key changes, but more of the changes will come clear as I work my way through some of the individual Incoterms of Incoterms 2020. Here is a picture of an exporter in Ireland. He may look familiar to you. He probably looks like my younger brother, but it's actually me. So think about it. We have this exporter exporting all over the world, but he's operating in his environment under the legislation and rules of the Republic of Ireland. So he's exporting to all these other jurisdictions. So it would be really nearly impossible to agree a contract of sale because the details will be so complex without international rules. So I'm going to just show you a little case study, and I'm going to ask you some questions. So if you don't mind, in the chat, just type in what you think the answer is. I know you all know the answer to this. It's very easy. Just type it in. I will not be picking up on the answers, but are we ready? Here we have a seller in Ireland. We have the importer in the UAE. They're agreeing a contract, and the contract they agree has a value of $3,250,000, and the Incoterm is CIF Jebel Ali Port. CIF Jebel Ali Port, cost, insurance, and freight. So to show you how valuable these Incoterms are, every Incoterm is only 3 letters, like the ABC. If you don't know your ABC, you cannot communicate. ABC, 3 letters. If you don't know your Incoterms, 3 letters. EXW, FOB, CIF, DDP. You cannot communicate internationally. But here is my question. Under CIF, just type in the answer. Who is responsible for organizing and paying for the freight? Seller or buyer? Just type seller or buyer. Who? Oh, you guys are flying in the answers. Amazing. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Seller, 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 exporter, seller, seller, exporter. Fantastic. Keep going. Okay. Under CIF, who is responsible for loading charges at the port of loading? Seller or buyer? Again, this one's a very easy question. And again, you are all answering, yeah, seller. Okay. Under CIF rule, who is responsible for import duty and taxes, if applicable? It won't apply in every country, but if import taxes were applicable under the rules CIF, who is responsible for import duties and taxes? Seller or buyer? Buyer, 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 buyer. You all know, you guys you're too good. Now, I want to slow down for a second, my dear friends, and ask you an important question. I'm the exporter in Ireland. You're the importer in the UAE. The Incoterm is CIF Jebel Ali Port. When does the risk in the goods transfer from seller to buyer? When the goods are shipped on board at the port of loading, or when the goods are delivered or shipped or delivered at the port of discharge? And the Incoterm is CIF Jebel Ali. So the answer I want is either port of loading or port of destination or discharge, whichever word you want. And this is really interesting one. Okay. Okay, very interesting. This POD, I guess that means port of discharge, Jebel Ali. port of discharge. Everyone is saying port of discharge. Okay. One person, port of shipment, port of loading. Oh, two persons, port of shipment, port of loading. But by far, most people are actually saying under CIF, the risk transfers from seller to buyer at the port of discharge. Now, my dear friends, I know you want me to tell you the right answer. I'm not going to tell you right now. I'm going to come back to this question later, and I'm going to ask a similar one, and then we will come back to it. But remember, most people said the risk transferred at the port of discharge. If you are correct, the implications under the COVID-19 in context of force majeure are really, really significant. So we will come to this a little bit later. Trust me, I will not forget. Okay, now I'm moving forward. Here we have, as we said, the importer in the UAE, and for just our example, it works. Our exporter is in Ireland, this beautiful country of mine here in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so different countries, different jurisdictions, different regulations. It's important to know that the Incoterms are international rules. So when I say international rules, they're not laws, they're just rules. And when I say they're rules, I mean they are voluntary rules. So what happens in most cases is the seller and the buyer incorporate them into their contract, maybe by just referencing Incoterms 2020 ICC. So when you do it means that the rules become an integral part of your international contract of sale. So they're not laws, but the thing is, if there is a dispute between the parties and it goes to court, while they are only rules, generally when it goes to court, the judge will ask, what did you guys agree? And you will say, the rule was, and then they will open the rule book, and that will outline the obligations of the seller and the buyer. So most days this is not important, but when something goes wrong, and in recent times, lots of things have gone wrong, Incoterm rules have become really, really, really important, as you will see. Here we have the 11 Incoterms, and I'm not going to go through this slide right now, okay? But I'm just going to tell you that for each of the 11 Incoterms, there are three key elements, and that is carriage of the goods, delivery, transfer of risk, and the third one then is who pays the various costs between the seller and the buyer. And that's where we're going on our next step in this webinar on Incoterms. And our timing is actually very, very good. So when we look at Incoterms, they are really important in the context of risk and context of risk management, you know, because thankfully, most days international trade happens without anything going wrong, because you guys, and ladies, you do such a wonderful job. But sometimes things go wrong, and I'm going to ask you a second practical question. Here on your screen you can see a ship, and you can see it's an interesting picture. Now again, picture I am the exporter, and then we have an importer. The Incoterm in this particular case was FOB. FOB, you're all familiar. FOB, free on board, Hamburg port, Incoterms. Okay, it's an old story. FOB, Hamburg port. Now what has happened here is the goods were shipped on board the vessel. The bills of lading have been issued, shipped on board a named vessel at the port of loading. I'm the exporter, and I'm actually holding the bills of lading in my hand, and then I see, oh my gosh, there has been a disaster, okay? And my goods were in that container you see on board there, and the door has opened, my goods have fallen out. And it was a very expensive MRI machine, a medical machine, costing about $7 million. So I'm going to ask you a question. Under the rules, FOB, and now I have the bill of lading in my hand, shipped on board, whose risk is it, seller or buyer? If you don't mind, and I have many people answering, yeah, great, excellent, you guys are really wonderful, yeah, excellent, okay. And everyone pretty much has got this one correct. Everyone is actually saying buyer, 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 importer, importer, buyer, importer. Excellent. So that's why the rules are so important. If we did not have, in this case, the rule clearly says risk transfers from seller to buyer when the goods are placed on board. Customary transport document, bill of lading. If the bill of lading evidences the goods have been shipped on board, even though the ship has not sailed anywhere, risk has transferred from seller to buyer. Well, I didn't need to tell you because everyone got this answer correct. The CIF one, not everyone got it correct, but the FOB one, everyone got it correct. To move forward a little bit on a few more practical aspects. On your screen, you can see the 11 Incoterms, okay? And on the left-hand side, you see EXW, FCA, FAS, FOB. And that is kind of where the seller's obligation, the exporter's obligation, happened, dare I say, on his side of the geographical travel of the goods. Where then we move to CIF, CFR, CIF, CIP, CPT, DAP, DPU, DDP. This is where the carriage of the goods is to a named place, port, or point of destination. Now, don't worry too much about this slide. It's not that important. But now what gets much more important relates to the mode of transport that is used in relation to the particular Incoterms, the mode of transport. So here we can see on the top left, we have rules that can be used in the rule book for any mode of transport. So EXW, FCA, DAP, CPT, CIP, DPU, DDP can be used for any mode of transport, but including marine shipments. And sometimes people think you cannot use CIP for marine shipments. It should only be CIF. Not correct. Not correct. But let's come to that a little bit more later. Oh, and someone actually asked me a question, but I'll deal with that a little bit later. And then we have rules for sea and inland waterway. These are designed specifically for water, sea and inland waterways. So FAS, free alongside ship, FOB, free on board, CIF, cost insurance and freight, CFR, marine terms. So moving forward, and I have a question here regarding FOB, regarding the freight charges. And well, you already, maybe I missed it, but of course under FOB, if there is a bill of lading, because it's a marine term, it's a strictly marine term, the question was regarding the freight charges. Well, that bill of lading would be expected to be marked FOB, freight collect. Okay, that's the answer. Okay. Now we move through the 11 Incoterms as quickly as I can, but as clearly as I can. Here we have an ICC diagram explaining how they operate. On the left, we have the seller with the goods. On the right, we have the buyer with the money. So the idea for good trade, if we facilitate trade, is that the goods get delivered as agreed and the money gets paid as agreed, everybody happy. And then intervening, we have local transport, export clearance formalities, licensing, approval, security, etc. We have loading of the goods on a ship, but maybe also on an aircraft, transport of the goods, maybe transshipment, arrival of the goods at the port of destination, airport of destination, or place of final destination. There will be the import clearance, import duty, taxes for customs, etc. And then there may be local delivery. Now, this is not everything, but these are the key elements in the movement of the goods between seller and buyer. Now, I'm the Irish exporter, and you are the importer in the UAE as we work through the Incoterms, just so we're all thinking the same way. So, for example, you ask me for a price of a certain machine, and I say to you, because I'm in Ireland and we use the euro, I say this machine is 52,000 euro EXW. Incoterms 2020. EXW means X works. So this means in the context of the carriage of the goods, seller has no obligation. You have every obligation. In regard to delivery and the risk, I have no extra obligation. The goods are available at my premises for you to organize collection or transport. I am not even responsible to load them on board your means of conveyance. And even if I load them on board your means of conveyance to help you, and the goods get damaged during loading, even though I'm helping you, it's your problem under EXW because the loading is an obligation of the buyer. And there are no additional costs because it's just EXW, X works Dublin. Now, I won't go into any more detail, but just to tell you, if you were in the UAE and I'm in Ireland, this is not a good Incoterm for you. It's nearly impossible, because to get the goods out of Ireland, the EU, you would need some form of export formality approval, and you operating in the UAE, not very, very easy to get. But what we might do is, we might achieve this by using the Incoterm, not Ex-Works, but using the Incoterm FCA. Remember, I'm the seller, you're the buyer in the UAE. So, for example, you want to buy my machine, and I say, sure. And now, this is in normal times. We'll talk about COVID and other force majeure later. You want to buy my machine, you ask me the price, I send you pro forma invoice, €53,500, FCA, Dublin Airport. I'm in Dublin. Now, when it's FCA, then, of course, I'm shipping the goods by air on a direct flight with Emirates Airlines, or maybe a direct flight to Abu Dhabi with Etihad, okay? So under FCA free carrier, my price has gone up a little bit, but now, under FCA, under the rule, I now must deliver the goods to the carrier or the carrier's agent, which could be you, not you, sorry, which could be the forwarder here in Ireland. I must deliver the goods to the carrier or the carrier's agent. So this means I have to get them ready for export, prepared for export, pass the export clearance. Now, just a little tip. If the Incoterm begins with the letter F, in every Incoterm beginning with the letter F, the seller is responsible for export clearance, export formalities. So when are the goods contractually delivered under FCA, with the goods going by air to Dubai? Well, for me to deliver them, they're delivered under the rule. One, they are handed into the custody of the carrier, that is the first carrier or their agent, and I obtain the customary transport document. So little bit of carriage from my premises to the airport past export clearance. My risk goes up a little bit, but it's in my own jurisdiction, so it's not significant. And my costs, of course, go up, but I build that into the invoice. So, of course, the goods are going by air. So customary transport document. What is the customary transport document? Under FCA, shipment of goods by air from Dublin to DXB. What is the customary transport document? Oh, you guys are so fast. You are absolutely fantastic. Everyone has put in AWB, AWB, AWB. 3 letters again, very handy. So I guess you all mean the airway bill. Moving on. FCA is also an interesting term, and I'm going to slow down for a moment. Remember when we talked about Ex-Works, and I said it was not a good term for you buying from me and you in the UAE, because you are responsible for export clearance, and that's nearly, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. But you know what? You want to pick the goods up at my factory, no problem. You have no problem with organizing this, okay? No problem. But you don't want the responsibility of export clearance, right? And you also don't want to be responsible for the loading. You would like me, seller, to be responsible for loading the goods on your means of conveyance. That's a practical thing to want. Well, that's where you could use, instead of EXW, seller's premises, we could agree FCA, seller's premises. So that would mean the nameplate for delivery of the goods is still my factory or warehouse, but because it's FCA or an F term, I am automatically responsible for all export clearance formalities, etc. And under FCA, I'm responsible for delivering the goods on board your means of conveyance at the agreed nameplates of delivery or making delivery available, which is my factory. And I know this is a lot to take in so quickly. And as Nadia said, this will give you a strong understanding, but maybe we could do something more detailed for you as a member later. FCA. Moving on. FAS, but I'll be very short with this one. FAS is strictly a marine term. Marine term, ships. Okay. So under FAS, free alongside ship, this is used extensively in the commodity trade, where perhaps the buyer is chartering a vessel. Chartering a vessel, a time charter or a voyage charter, hiring a vessel to pick up a large cargo from a port in the country of export, for example. But under FAS, remember, I'm the seller, my obligation will be to deliver the goods on the quay at the port of shipment, or to deliver the goods on board a barge. And now we use barges a lot in Europe, okay? Deliver the goods on board a barge or on the quay at the port of shipment. And of course, then all loading, etc., will be the responsibility of the buyer. Loading charges, responsibility of the buyer. But the good thing is, it is still an F term. F term. So if it's an F term, all formalities, export clearance automatically is for account of the seller under the Incoterms. FAS, carriage to the named port on the quay or on a barge. Risk transfers when the goods are delivered at that point. And the costs are for the seller up to that point. But of course, the seller is not responsible for any loading charges, etc., because it's delivered on the quay or on the barge before loading on board the nominated or named vessel. Moving forward, okay, I have a, oh, well, just 1 second now. I have a question. Very good. Very good. You guys are excellent. Excellent. Okay. I just a question. Just I have 1 or 2 questions here. If you don't mind, I've got a question. In FCA, can the nameplate be origin airport? The answer is yes. The second part of your question is, if yes, if the seller's truck reaches Oregon Airport, they're delivered. Okay, and the simple answer is yes. But you know what? It's not that simple. There needs to be evidence, and that evidence is the customary document. And in our case study earlier, I asked you what was the document, and you all told me that airway bill. So that airway bill that was either signed by the agent or by the carrier, that actually would be defining that the goods have actually been delivered by the seller to the buyer. And then the next thing is, offloading is not responsibility of the seller, correct? Correct, okay? The seller has delivered the goods once they're handed into the custody of the first carrier at the airport of departure, okay? So wonderful question. You really know what you're talking about. So moving on, my dear friends, to the one you're totally familiar with, and that's FOB, really no change. FOB, again, is strictly a marine term. FOB, free on board. So, I'm selling the goods to you. I'm in Ireland. You're in Dubai. And let's say, for example, I'm residing in Dublin, but I'm not. But let's say I'm residing in Dublin, because everyone knows Dublin City. Okay. So under FOB, if we just agree FOB, Incoterms 2020, my obligation is to get the goods, and the risk and delivery stays with me until, under the rules, the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. Until the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. So once the goods are shipped on board, placed on board at the port of shipment, the risk transfers from seller to buyer. So seller's carriage of goods is just to get them on board the vessel. The risk transfers once they are on board, as evidenced by the customary transport document. You know, typically this is a marine term. So our document is going to be a bill of lading, marine bill of lading, ocean bill of lading, and the costs are for the seller to that point. So different to FAS. Now under FOB, my costs have gone up a little bit, because now I'm also responsible for, and I must pay for, the loading charges at the port of shipment. All other freight charges, etc., import duties, taxes, unloading for account of the buyer. FOB, very commonly used term. Okay, and I have another question here. Very good question, and I'm being asked here, but I'd like you to answer it. The question is, can FOB be used for air shipments? Because I said marine, but someone asked, can FOB be used for air shipments? Just type in yes or no. And you're answering your own, you're helping me with your own questions, yeah? Yes, 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 yes. No, someone said no, it should be FCA. Oh, someone else said FCA. Someone else said FCA, and someone said yes. Okay. So you see, there could be confusion in the rules. Well, the answer is this. You can do whatever you want, okay? But there are implications in doing whatever you want. Because FOB is a marine term, if there was a problem, an accident, or something goes wrong, you could be in a significant legal mess, okay? Because in court, it would turn out, the judge would say, okay, what does the rule say about transfer of risk? Or risk transfers when the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. But this is not a port. This is not a marine shipment. This rule does not apply. Now, if there's nothing wrong, goes wrong, it's fine because everyone knows what it means. But really, you gave me the correct answer. In this instance, the correct and appropriate Incoterm to be used is FCA, which is free carrier, and not FOB. And then under FCA, we know the risk has transferred once the goods are delivered in the custody of the carrier, and you get that airway bill signed by the carrier, or their agent, Okay, moving on a little bit, and please feel free to ask one or two more questions. I mean, as many as you like. I'll answer as best I can. So, Habib,
yeah,
you're here.
Yeah, we have some poll question. If you want, I can launch them as well.
You know what we're going to do? I want you to get ready to be very, very fast.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay, I want you to be really fast. Yeah, because
sure.
what I want you to do is, I want you to do all 4 poll questions, kind of do one, and then give 5 seconds. Okay, here's the second one. And don't worry, everybody. Just pick what you think is the right answer. I will not be criticizing or anything. So go through all 4. Away you go.
I'm going with the, I will launch the first one, which is here, and it will be for 5 seconds. So we are waiting for their reply. And so we have now some replies coming. I will end the polling now and we'll share the result.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Nearly 99% are very familiar that CIP now is higher risk recovery. That's nearly 90%. That is a key change in Incoterms. Well done. Second question, please.
Okay, so I go to second one, which will be, okay, here. So launched and now waiting for your reply.
Oh,
we
tricky.
have,
CHC has been renamed to
FAS, CPT, and
really
DPU.
important.
So we are done now. I'll be stopping the polling now. And we'll share the result where.
Oh, fantastic. Okay,
DPU.
85%, nearly 90%, absolutely. But this needs to be 100%. We need to know that this Incoterm is now DPU, but don't worry, I'll explain DPU a little bit later.
Okay, so I'll go to the next one, which is here, and I'll launch it now for 10 seconds for the polling. So we are receiving some answers now, and so we will close it now.
Now the
okay, and here we are 75% says yes.
Now this is really interesting. I am speaking so positively about Incoterms 2020. You probably think they're the only thing in the world, you know. So 75% said we can only use Incoterms 2020. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that answer. But here you need to know the technical answer. The technical and legal answer is that these are voluntary rules. So while it's always recommended to use the most up-to-date rules, it's up to the counterparties in the contract to agree what rules they actually use. Maybe they won't use any rules at all. They'll just spell out everything in the contract, but that's not a good idea. But the correct answer is voluntary rules. They're recommended, but they're not mandatory. If you want it, if you really want it, but I don't recommend it, you could continue with Incoterms 2010. Habib, continue.
Okay.
I think
so we go to the last one, which is the fourth one.
Wonderful answers. Really, you guys are great.
Okay. Now we are waiting for your response. It started coming now.
This is kind of a trick question. This is a kind of a trick question. You know, so
I'll give a bit more time then, maybe 15 seconds.
Yeah,
I will stop polling now, and the result is here. 68%
Very good. Okay, okay. You know, this is kind of a trick question because correctly I told you under FOB, their goods are delivered when they are placed on board. They're delivered, okay? Correctly, I told you the risk transfers when the goods are placed on board, shipped on board, as evidenced by the bill of lading. But just to highlight, because people get into trouble with this one because they're not aware, just to highlight very clearly, the Incoterms rules do not deal with title ownership of the goods transferring from one party to another. You know, I also would be inclined to think, oh, if I deliver and if risk transfers, title also, but no, you need to be aware this is not the case. The rules do not articulate regarding transfer of title at all. We need to expressly deal with this in the international contract of sale. Thank you very much, Habibi. That was really
You're
wonderful.
welcome.
Okay. Now, my dear friends, we've gone through E terms, X works, and then F terms. We had F terms, FCA, FAS, FOB. But now we move on to C, begins with the letter C. Now, every Incoterm that begins with the letter C, the seller is responsible for freight or carriage to a named port or place of destination. C. So now, for example, you're familiar with CFR. Under CFR, named port of destination, because strictly a marine term, the seller must deliver the goods by vessel to a named port of destination. Under CFR, believe me, under the rule book, even though it's CFR, named port of destination, even though it's CFR, named port of destination, under the rule book, CFR, risk transfers from seller to buyer when the goods are placed on board at the port of, someone typed loading, the port of shipment, port of loading, either one, but you're absolutely correct. The risk transfers here, and the seller must pay the cost, including freight charges, to the named port of destination. The importer is responsible for unloading the goods and unloading charges, responsible for import taxes and clearance. Of course, unloading charges, unless of course the unloading was included in the freight charges under the contract of carriage, but that's a separate issue. Now moving on to an Incoterm you are really, really familiar with, and that's CIS. So we all know what the I stands for. I stands for insurance. So I'm just going to ask a little general question, but you know the answer. And but I just asked the question is this. Under the Incoterm rules, CIF, a minimum percentage of insurance cover is required. Minimum percentage of the value, okay? So could anyone tell me what that percentage is? Is it 60%, 70%, 90%, 100%, 130%? Can anyone tell me? Yes. Oh, you all know so well. So yes, it's all coming through here. Yeah, it's coming through. And we have 110, 110, 110, everyone knows. Okay. The minimum insurance coverage required is 110% of the invoice or CIF value. So under CIF, the seller delivers the goods and must pay the carriage to the named port of destination. But the risk transfers. Now remember, the seller must organize insurance. The insurance must be for 110%. But actually, even so, the risk transfers from seller to buyer under the Incoterm rule. Once the goods are placed on board the vessel, risk at the port of shipment. So while this is not the language used in the rule book, in keeping it simple, I could say the seller organizes the insurance, but the insurance is really on behalf of the buyer. And remember, the change in Incoterms, CIF, unless otherwise agreed in the contract, the rule requires insurance only on minimum terms. So if you want, for example, all risk coverage, that needs to be specified in the contract. Seller pays the cost of the freight charges to the named port of destination, and our timing is pretty good. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually take you through an interesting legal case. And this is a legal case that links up the Incoterm with the money, the payment of the money. And it's an old case, but I think it's really interesting, and it'll only take me about 4 or 5 minutes to go through it. So here is the story, a true story. There was an exporter in the UK exporting to Poland. The goods were cement magnesite, which is kind of a, I don't know, cement powder, quick drying cement powder. The exporter in UK said to the importer, my dear friend, I have a good idea. Send me the money and then I will send you the goods. And the importer in Poland said, that's a very good idea, but I have a better idea. You send me the goods, then I'll send you the money. So this is the common problem in international trade. So they agreed a compromise, and that compromise that was that before the goods would be shipped, there will be no transfer of money, but instead there will be an irrevocable, confirmed, documentary letter of credit issued by a bank in Poland and confirmed by a bank in the UK. The letter of credit was issued by the bank in Poland, and I've made it short because short is good, okay? And this is kind of what the letter of credit looked like, okay? Bear with me, even if you're not familiar, I think you'll understand. So a bank issued this letter of credit undertaking. So the bank's undertaking, on behalf of Polymex, the importer, applicant, we issue our irrevocable documentary credit. It cannot be cancelled or amended without your agreement. For $3.7 million, available by side payment with Barclays Bank London. So this means side payment. Barclays received the documents, they examined them at site, they comply, bank must pay because they added their confirmation to the letter of credit. Don't worry if you don't understand. Here we have description of the goods, 50,000 ton cement magnetite, CIF Gdynia port in Poland, Incoterms, an old version of Incoterms, but still an interesting story. Documents required, signed invoices in triplicate, CIF, insurance 110%, CIF, marine bills of lading, full set 3 originals, marine bills of lading, but also because the importer was buying for the first time, the letter of credit required an inspection certificate, issued by Qualspeco, dated before shipment, subject to the UCP rules of the ICC. Now, remember, most times everything goes okay, no problem. But sometimes something goes wrong. There's an accident, there's a storm, there's strikes, right, civil commotion, force majeure. But this was not a force majeure, but we get to it later. Here's what happened. Practical case. When the ship was sailing from Southampton port to Gdynia port in Poland, there was a storm and the sea got very, very rough. The water got into the ship. Ship full of cement powder, okay? I shouldn't be laughing, I know, but anyway. The water got into the ship, okay? And when the ship arrived at the port of discharge in Gdynia, it wasn't full of cement powder, there was a rock inside, or a little mountain. So the importer did not want to pay $3.7 million for a rock or a little mountain. So this is an old story. So the importer and their bank in Poland managed to get a court order, court injunction, temporarily stopping Barclays for paying the $3.7 million because the goods were worthless, absolutely worthless. But here's what happened. In 1 week, it went to the Court of Appeal in London. A very famous judge, Lord Dinning, was ruling on the day, and he made his rule very quickly. And he said, this is a very simple case based on ICC rules. One book of rules is known as the UCP, that's the Uniform Custom and Practice for Documentary Credits, and the other book of rules are Incoterms, International Commercial Terms. So first of all, he said, under the UCP for documentary credits, and I know this, please bear with me just for a few more minutes, and our timing is good. Under the UCP, banks deal with documents. So Barclays Bank, have you received the documents? And they said, yes, Your Honor. Do the documents comply? Yes, Your Honor. Under the rules, banks deal with, the UCP, banks deal with documents, banks must pay, so the exporter got the money. And then he said there is the contract and the delivery and the risk elements that are discussion. He said the answer is also found in the ICC rules. The Incoterm was CIF, cost, insurance and freight, and even under the old rule book, it said risk transfers from seller to buyer under CIF when the goods, this is the old version, when the goods cross the ship's rail at the port of shipment. Buyer's risk. So seller got the money, buyer got the rock, but the buyer also got the insurance. And the buyer was able to make an insurance claim and recover a lot of their losses. So that's how we manage the risk between the documentary credit and the contract and Incoterms. Incoterms now 2020. Moving forward just a little bit, CPT and CIP are pretty much parallel to actually CPT, CFR and CIF. But of course, CIP and CPT are for air shipments, but in fact they're for any mode of shipment, but they are used extensively for air shipment. So again, really, you should not be using CIF for air shipments. Really, you should be using CIP. CIP. My friends, this brings us to the D terms, the delivered terms, and here we have DAP, and I nearly said DAT, but DAT is gone. So we have DAP and DPU coming up. So I'm the seller in Ireland, okay? You're the buyer in UAE. And you say to me, Vin, it's good to do business with you. We're doing business for a long time, but we had some recent issues with other suppliers. And of course, this COVID thing is kind of worrying as well. Then we would like you to take responsibility and risk until the goods are delivered in Dubai. And I go, okay, yeah. So I'm moving from CIP. You want me to move from CIP to DAP? And you say, yeah, if you don't mind. And I said, well, I don't mind, but I'm taking on a bit more risk and responsibility. So my price will probably go up a little bit. And you said, no, don't worry, as long as it's a modest increase, as long as you will take responsibility. I said, okay. So now we're not using CIP anymore. I'm moving to DAP. Because under DAP, my goods going by air, as in our example, now O'Brien, the seller, the risk in delivery of the goods stays with him until delivered to the named place, which could be Dubai International Airport. So I'm responsible for carriage to Dubai International Airport. But this time, the risk stays with O'Brien until the goods are delivered to Dubai International Airport. And of course, I'm paying the air freight if they're going by air, going by air to Dubai International Airport. Buyer then is responsible for unloading charges. But of course, if it's an air shipment, it's not so important. But DAP could also be used for marine shipments, charter parties, etc. Then it would be important. So DAP, delivered at place of destination, risk and costing with buyer till delivered at that named place of destination, delivery and risk. Buyer responsible for unloading and any associated import charges, clearance, etc., taxes, etc. Very good. DAP does not include unloading for the account of the seller, so I'm not responsible. But now we move to the new Incoterm, which is DPU. DPU, delivered, place, unloaded. And I know when I see Habib appearing, it means I need to watch my time. Okay, I know. I've got the message before. Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. So at DPU, delivered at place, unloaded, O'Brien is responsible for delivering the goods to the named place, Dubai International Airport. I pay the risk until they're at Dubai International Airport. I take the cost until Dubai International Airport. It sounds like DAP. But the significant difference is that between DAP and DPU is that DPU always includes unloading the goods at the named place, port, or point of destination. And that's basically it. And that brings us to our final Incoterm, which you already know. And this is DDP. And even though you know it, you don't see it used very often. And actually, I don't see it used very often for practical purposes. I'm in Ireland exporting to different countries around the world, or they're exporting to me. I can control so much, but it's very difficult to be familiar with the import regulations and customs in countries all over the world. So it's not used so significantly. But to explain, if I give you the DDP Incoterm, deliver duty paid, I'm responsible to deliver the goods to your designated named place. The document is usually a proof of delivery, which you would sign. The risk stays with seller to the buyer until the goods are delivered. And this is after all import duties, taxes, clearance, etc. And the costs are paid by the seller, all the costs until the buyer. And that brings us to the end of our 11 Incoterms. So, Habib, I just want to tell a little story, if you don't mind. Right
sure,
now.
please.
So, I just have a look at the questions and answers. Yeah. Perfect. And I'm just looking at the chat to see if there are any more questions.
Vincent, I think I saw one question which I think was not answered, which is quite important. Somebody asked that if documents are presented to the bank under the LC and documents comply, but the goods does not arrive due to COVID-19. So will the bank pay, or what would be that case?
Okay, that's a really important question. But yeah, would you remind us one more time, because it sounds like and I don't want to give the wrong answer. Just if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, it is the documents are presented to the bank under an LC, and the documents comply, but the good does not arrive because of COVID-19. So will the bank pay or otherwise?
That sounds like $1 million question to me, maybe multi-million-dollar question. But here was the answer based on ICC rules, and it's absolutely clear. And you can quote me on this to your bank if you want. Okay.
Yeah.
The goods have been shipped.
Yeah.
I guess maybe even transshipped, but they're not arriving at the port of discharge, or even if they've arrived, they can't be unloaded. See, we don't know the story, but that's not your question. What has happened, the goods were shipped, but now the documents go into the bank, okay?
Yes.
But the goods are not being delivered. Of course, the buyer won't want to pay. So your question is, must the bank pay? The answer decisively is, if those documents comply, the bank must pay, has an obligation to pay, even if the goods are delayed, even if the goods don't arrive, even if the ship sank and disappeared. If the documents comply, the bank must pay. And of course, you're not asking me about fraud or stealing or criminal. It's just one of these operational questions. That is the answer. Bank must pay. Okay. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is, everyone is interested in force majeure. Okay. And I said I would speak about force majeure. So I'm just going to go through this force majeure case very quickly. I think I'm okay for time, Habib, for a few more minutes.
So we are done with time. We can go for 5 more minutes.
Okay, so I'll go for 6. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. I recently received an email from someone on force majeure, and here you can see the email on the screen. But don't worry, I'll zoom in a moment. And the query was regarding CIF, name port of destination, force majeure. Okay. So here was the question. Dear Mr. Vin, okay, that's me. We shipped the goods on basis of CIF, I guess name port of destination, Incoterms 2020, must be a recent case. And the goods were loaded on board the vessel, the name of the vessel, at the port of shipment for destination port. The problem is that due to lockdown at port of destination, I think I know what country this is, goods could not be unloaded, and the buyer is suffering acute delay in delivery of the goods plus demurrage, etc. Okay. The buyer holding back payment due to force majeure at the port of discharge, which he says is unexpected and beyond his control, as it was a state-driven lockdown for health purposes. I think I definitely know what country this is. Okay. What can I do, as if goods not delivered, we will lose payment rights? Wow. Sounds like we have a problem here. So to zoom in on the key elements, we shipped on the basis of CIF, port of destination, Incoterms 2020. Goods were loaded on board vessel at a vessel. The vessel is called Vin. Good name. That's my name. Okay. At the port A, which is the port of shipment, for destination port B. So the goods were shipped on board. The problem is that due to lockout at port of destination, okay, the goods could not be unloaded, and the buyer is suffering acute delay in delivery of goods plus demurrage. The buyer is holding back payment. Well, to be honest, this lady actually is telling me the buyer is holding back payment. Now, to be honest, if I was the buyer, I wouldn't feel like paying, okay? Because I don't have my goods to sell in the market, so I wouldn't feel like paying, but we have rules, okay? The buyer is holding back payment due to force majeure at the port of discharge, which he says is unexpected and beyond his control, as it is a state-driven lockdown for health purposes. What can I do if goods not delivered? We will lose payment rights. Sounds like Ashley has a problem. But you know what? I have a solution for her, a part of a solution. And the solution is this, Ashley. You are saying the buyer in his communication is saying that, well, he's experiencing a delay in delivery of the goods, and accordingly, he's not going to pay. But actually, the Incoterm was CIF, Incoterms 2020. So the rules apply, agreed by the parties. They weren't forced to use it. They decided to use it. CIF. And under CIF, when we look at CIF, we look at the rule, one of the 11 rules. We see that under CIF, the goods are delivered. The goods are delivered when they are placed on board the vessel at the named port of shipment. So for Ashley and for you, the good news is that the seller has already delivered the goods. So now this triggers the buyer's obligation. But Habib, dare I say, this could link to your question when you asked me about the letter of credit. You know, if the documents were presented to a bank and the documents don't comply, well, even though the buyer has an obligation to pay under the contract, you may have a problem getting your money. But I think that's a case for another day when we talk about letters of credit. So I think I've covered everything, and I'm just going to have one last look and see is there any question that has not been answered. And oh, just one new question, if you don't mind, Nadia. I'll answer it because I want to be complete.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. Of course, I mentioned we can use CIP and CIF for marine shipments. You are correct. So the question was, then what is the key difference using CIP or CIF? So very good question. Well, here is the answer to your question. As you know, and as we articulated, under CIF, the seller delivers the goods to the buyer. CIF, marine term, the seller delivers the goods to the buyer when the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. If, for example, the goods were still going by marine, so you're right, yes, we can use it for marine, but you use the term CIP, named port of destination, right? So it sounds the same. CIF, named port of destination, but your question, what if it's CIP, named port of destination? Well, the answer is this. Under CIP, the goods are delivered and the risk transfers a little bit earlier than placed on board. Under CIP, the goods are delivered by the seller to the buyer when they are handed into the custody of the carrier or the carrier's agent. So this will be the first one in a string, the carrier or the carrier's agent at the port of shipment. So in a nutshell, this means CIP, the risk transfers from seller to buyer a little bit earlier. So this would commonly be used for containerized shipments, etc. And I think I have answered all the questions. And I'm sorry, I'm 7 minutes over time. So I hope you'll forgive me.
Thank
so
you,
Nadia.
Yeah. I think, Vincent, can I have just mentioned two things. One, if anybody needs Incoterm 2020 book, they can place an order to our office, or they can place an order online on iccuae.com, and they can also make the payment online, and the book will be delivered to them by courier. If
Wonderful.
anybody wish to organize the same training for their staff, in-house training, we can also help them in that case, and they can send us inquiries to info@iccuae.com, or they will receive an email from us, thanks email, and they will be receiving all the contact details over there, so they can get back to us.
And actually, Habib, someone, maybe you saw this question. Someone asked, is it possible to become a certified Incoterms expert? And yes, it is. Yes, it's possible for you to get an ICC certificate in Incoterms 2020, which is a very good addition to your CV, etc. And finally, these rules are all developed by practitioners, so you know more about this business, the freight and logistics, than me. I know the banking side, but obviously I know my Incoterms as well. But you would all be welcome to join us as members so we can use your brain power to develop better rules to facilitate trade for this challenged world of ours. So thank you so much, Nadia, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for supporting us, Vincent, Habib. Jovel, and the entire team. Thank you, our attendees. I see a good number of participants attending. The main idea is to update you and make sure that we reduce the risk while you're shipping goods or accepting goods from any of your clients, and to know there's nothing wrong with asking questions or feeling it's a silly question. Use the expert that we have to answer any doubts that you have, because the last thing you need is to get a case or have, as you said, demerit charges coming up because of the pandemic or any other issues or mistakes within the documentation, etc. Last week we had the TT Club speaking about the liabilities and insurance.
Yes.
So we need to be very well acquainted. Our staff need to be very well acquainted also with the terms, because they will be able also to advise the buyers and the sellers on the risk transfer. Thank you for being here with us, and we hope to see you on our upcoming seminars. And as I said, if you'd like to be certified and take the full day course with ICC, NAFL gets a special rate, so you can contact ICC. They can do it for your staff, or we can host it as a NAFL initiative for all our members, the same thing as a webinar, but a full day webinar. Thank you for being here with us, and I look forward to seeing you again. And if you have any questions, you can send your questions to our office, and we will have the replies by Vincent to you. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Habib, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.